I recently bought a bundle of over 2,000 35mm railway slides, unseen from the internet. They said there were some British Railway subjects in them, but crazy. What was I thinking? Well, as it turned out, they were something of a curate's egg, but the deeper I delved, the more interesting things started to turn up. Amongst the Austrian trams, aircraft, German diesel locos and photos of someone's garden gnomes in the 1960s, there were some real gems, such as this handful of slides of the Ffestiniog Railway. Now, there's no great mystery here, but I thought it might be fun to work out when they'd been taken. I'm not very knowledgeable, so I hope someone can point me in the right direction. Many of the slides in my bargain bundle dated from the mid to late 60s, so that was a start. This first image is of Linda at port. A clue is that the carriage behind Linda is in tatty, varnished teak finish, and it looks a bit of a mess. I found out from Ffestipedia that most carriages were cherry red by 1971. Then, Linda was converted to oil firing in 1971, so that too confirms the date, as there's coal in the tender. I know Linda went through various overhauls and changes of tender, etc., so perhaps more knowledgeable heads than mine could narrow the date down even further. Here she is at Tanabulch, with fire irons in the tender and a varnished teak carriage, and what might be Bill Hoole in his BR grease-top cap. If that is the legendary man, then we know that he started in 1959 and sadly retired after a stroke in 1967, so perhaps this puts the slide at, say, 1966. I say this as other slides of the TR in the collection are dated the same. The next rather beautiful image, almost like a painting, seems to be later. I can't place where it is. My instinct is Theacht, but I don't know. I don't think that watercolumn's there today. The last shot of Linda at Boston Lodge with a hazy Urwyddfa behind it is much later. She's oil-fired and has the Lempor exhaust, hence the strange funnel. That was fitted in 1985, but only lasted a year, so we have the date of 1985 to 1986 for this slide. Here's Mountaineer at port. She has the awful butchered cab, so is pre-1985, but the carriages pull it back to 1971, as they're teak. Also, the empty space behind the loco would be filled with a cafe and gift shop in 1975. Ghastly flats on the wharves aren't there either, so I'm feeling late 60s on this one. The next slide is much later. There's a new reprofiled and more attractive cab, fitted in 1984. There are all sorts of detail differences which I'm not qualified to comment on, but which would probably date the shot more precisely. Perhaps the larger nameplate is a clue. I know there are certain issues around Mountaineer, such as her weight distribution and enthusiastic spark throwing, but I can't wait to have her back in traffic. I miss hearing her haunting whistle in the Kai Valley woods. Next is a slide of Merthin Emrys, with admirers, on what looks like the deviation. Lots of curious detail in this shot. But I must be careful, as I've been told off by folk for disrespecting this incarnation of Merthin. I know he was a very powerful and much-loved loco, even in this Frankenstein guise. Sorry. So when might this be? There seems to be coal in the bunkers and none of the breather pipes, etc. for the oil firing, so that puts it pre-1973 at least. That's the best I can do. Perhaps other more knowledgeable heads can put me right on this. Here's a closer shot at Theacht, with coal. It must have been drafty to drive. Here's a fascinating shot of the twin fire hole doors. What a cramped space to work in. And how do you shut those doors? Finally, for Merthin, here's a later photo at Theacht. Oil firing fitted, so it's after 1973. He went into the works for a complete overhaul and makeover in 1985, so that gives us a window of, say, 12 years. If anyone has anything further to add, please do in the comments below. Now, here's one of my favourite locos, Prince, taken at Blaenau Ffestiniog, as the levels of Gloddfa Ganol and the pointy eminence of Craig Nitha Gigfran are behind. This is 1980-1986, as Prince has the stepped footplate from the rebuild, but is in green. He'd be painted red by 1986. Now, sadly, this slide has deteriorated, but it's fascinating. This is Princess at Blaenau Ffestiniog, probably 1970, although her green livery is at odds with the rather slaty appearance on the Festipedia site. I'm very glad that she no longer has to hang about outside anymore, and that spell luxuriating in spooners can't have done her any harm. She is described these days as a roving ambassador for the FR. Not a bad role, considering that she was the last loco to work the railway before the closure in 1946. After that, it would be 9 years before reopening. And now for something completely different. The Harrogate Gasworks Peckett, euphemistically described as in store at Boston Lodge, which really means standing outside in the pouring rain. There's a date of 1971 on this one, which seems right. The loco was found to be unsuitable for the track due to its long 060 wheelbase, and was eventually sold to the Bredgar and Worms Hill Light Railway, but it seemed to like the role of square peg, and didn't fit in there either. Finally, it's found a good home at the Statfold Barn Railway. I hope you've enjoyed this little exploration of some of the slides I've bought. I've got a heck of a lot more to go through. If you can add any details about these images, I'd be very pleased to hear, even if you're telling me I'm completely wrong. Thanks very much for watching, and stay tuned for more Steam videos soon.